Hey guys, what's going on? I've read 20 books so far this year, which is well below my goal, but I'm happy with it anyways. And we are going to rank them from worst to best. And we're going to go pretty fast and loose. Starting with The Sands of Mars by Arthur C. Clarke. This is about a guy that goes to Mars and not too much else. I'm reading it obviously from a 2024 perspective, and from that perspective there's not a lot of novel ideas in here. There's also not a lot of conflict in here, but what Arthur C. Clarke does manage to deliver is that sense of awe you get from space in its entirety and in its unimaginable vastness, which I'm told is his trademark. That is what Clarke is known for, so he is still delivering it in the year 2024, and even at the bottom of the list, there is reasons to read. Next up, we got The Weapon Shops of Isher by A.E. Van Vogt. This one is about an interdimensional, time-traveling weapon shop that supplies civilians with weapons that can be used in self-defense, mainly against dictatorships, against tyrannical governments. And it was confusing, and it was clunky. It was originally a fix-up novel. Supposedly A.E. Van Vogt is the originator of the fix-up novel, and you could tell. It was loosely stitched together. It almost read as three different stories in the same universe. But so did City by Simak, and I love that book. This one just didn't have the cohesion. I was lost reading it. There was some plot point of a guy who became unstuck in time, kind of. He was far into the future, and there was some sort of potential energy between where he came from and where he was that threatened to destroy the world or something like that. I don't know. I became unstuck in this story and I couldn't go any further. Next up, The Star Is My Destination by Alfred Bester. This one came highly recommended. It's just an action book. There's a very unlikable main character who finds himself stuck on some sort of satellite at the very beginning, so it's a revenge story. Kind of like The Count of Monte Cristo, where you set up this character and you set up the reasons why he wants revenge on someone, and then he enacts it. So you think that would be the perfect setup, but the main character is so unlikable. And I know he's supposed to be. He's not supposed to be your typical hero. He's not supposed to be a good guy, but I couldn't get over that. Sure, it's on me, and also reading it from a 2024 perspective, there's aspects that may have not made him a villain at the time, but do now. It was a wild ride. It was high flying. It was action packed. He went through all these different worlds and characters, and I don't know, not my cup of tea. Next up, The Iron Heel by Jack London. This is about a far future world that has been experiencing capitalism for a long time. Alternate title for this one would be Late Stage Capitalism. Written by Kid Communist himself, Jack London, who warns that eventually corporations gain more power and have more influence and will eventually rule every aspect of the world. And was he correct? Yeah, certainly on some aspects, but he does paint this hellscape where people are made into essentially slaves for the corporations, and a very small percentage of the people have all of the power. And you know, that is ringing some bells. But as a story, as a fictional narrative, it does not rate. It's a piece of propaganda, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think he has a lot of valid things to say. It's just that the word propaganda has this negative connotation because generally you talk about Nazi propaganda. The best thing that comes out of this book is the term phrase slaves, and I have been trying to figure out what phrases I am a slave to. I found one the other day. What was it? Progressives. When I see the word progressives, I'm already made up my mind about whatever it is they're talking about. And in this book, they say that the people higher up has made everyone into phrase slaves because they were so good at manipulating language that they could write an article, put in some select phrases, and have the vast majority of people think a certain way about it. And that definitely rings the most true out of anything else in that book. So, has a lot of validity just for that. Next up, White Noise by Don DeLillo in this beautiful orange penguin edition. And I wish I liked all three of these a little bit better. But I think I would have ranked this a lot higher if I hadn't read any Vonnegut. Unfortunately, I was going into this book thinking it was Vonnegut adjacent, and it was. It was just not orchestrated as well. It's about a town that experiences a, what does he call it? A toxic airborne event, I think it is. On the outskirts of town, some train car hits another, chemicals mix. So there is this tangible embodiment of death floating around this city, and he examines how the different characters react to it. So he's talking about death and how to deal with it and how you can't really and how some people do in generally irrational ways. And I think he does a good job exploring that. But like I've said, Vonnegut just does it so much better. He has a much more refined bedside manner for this kind of thing because people don't want to think about that kind of thing. They don't want to look at that in any kind of detail, but you do kind of have to because that is the destination. You're dealing with these harsh things. And Don DeLillo kind of just dumps it on you. He doesn't really divvy up the harsh realities. He doesn't pad them. He has the same absurdist approach, which I think is the best approach for delivering this kind of information. But Vonnegut just knows what he's dealing with, and he knows how difficult it is to absorb and to consume, and it's just better structured. It's also much shorter, which I think is a big aspect. Because as in life, you have to look at death in the face, but you don't want to do it for too long, and it is something that you can become locked gazing at. And of course, it gazes back at you, and you don't want to be there. But your eventual death should shape how you live today. I mean, that's the best reason to ponder that. Anyways, like I said, Vonnegut does it better, but it was a decent book. Next up, we got New Hampshire by Robert Frost, which is poetry. I'm not a poetry person. I get lost in the cadence of these. I feel like I'm not reading them correctly because they all are just a bunch of incomplete sentences that I'm trying to read and make flow. But someone in the comments said that poetry is meant to be read aloud, not inside your head. So maybe I was doing that wrong. But despite that, there were a number of good poems, mainly his big ones. I really like the ones that I had heard of before, and then other than that, they were mediocre. Not that I know what makes a good poem. Next up, we got Star-Lord by Louise Lawrence. This book is exactly E.T. the Extraterrestrial and the Iron Giant. It's that storyline. It was barely science fiction. It was very light. It was very easy breezy, something that you would read to take a break from more serious books like White Noise. And I liked it for that. It's hard to compare that kind of book with these other kind of books because they're trying to do totally different things. But for what it was trying to do, which is be a lighthearted, entertaining book, I think it did it well, but it wasn't nutritious. I'm probably not going to remember it 5 years from now. Next, A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, which is presumably his experiences in World War I and the horrors that entailed for everyone involved. I don't like Hemingway's style. I want to, I tried to, but it's just really clunky. It takes you a long time to get into the flow of what he's given you, but he's got a lot of good quotes in there. The one that sticks with me the most is that the world bends everyone, and those that refuse to bend break. It is kind of pessimistic if you look at it the wrong way, but there are things that you just have to adapt to. There are many aspects of the world, perhaps every aspect of the world, that you have absolutely no control over, so you have to accept it or not, but either way, it's still going to happen. The worst part about this book is the ending. I cannot forgive you for that, Hemingway. Holy crap, that was sad. Next up, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. This book, and also A Farewell to Arms, I'm kind of reluctant to admit this, but they're both books that I'm glad to have read, but I did not enjoy reading them because they're such foundational literary pieces and they are referenced, even like the characters in these books are referenced as something you should know about. But it's kind of like being prescribed them in school. There are certain books, you're not going to like reading them, but they have a lot of good things to say. On the Road by Jack Kerouac is, again, presumably his experiences traveling the road in the 50s. He wakes up and he just goes where the wind takes him. Could be California, could be Denver, could be New Jersey. That's where he kind of circles around. And it's written in this roller coaster format where he is making it to his destination with his friends and they're going out to a smoky jazz club in the slums and they're drinking and they're smoking and they're partying and they're having the best night of their life. And then the next morning they're trying to find somewhere to sleep and they're knocking on people's doors and they don't have any money and their baby mamas are catching up to them and they're finding out that they have responsibilities. but then they go to the next town and then it starts again and it goes up and down. And that's what he was trying to get across, is that this lifestyle is fun, but it's not sustainable, and perhaps it's something you do a few years in your 20s. At least that's what I got from it as a person who is past that stage of my life, and it kind of reads as a horror story in certain places as a 30-year-old introvert. So it could read very differently depending on what stage you are at in life. What I was most impressed about in this book is how Jack Kerouac writes jazz. And that doesn't really make any sense. How do you write jazz? It's like, how do you write classical piano? But somehow he does it. And I think this was when jazz was on the upswing, so this kind of propelled it, because people could read this book and kind of understand what jazz was about, which is reason enough to read this book. I'll be the teacher. I'll prescribe you this book. You're not going to enjoy reading it all the time, but it's got a lot of interesting things for you to have in your brain. Another one like that is The Snow Leopard by Peter Matthiessen. It's a nonfiction, actually. You could call it a nature memoir. It's about a guy who goes to the Himalayas to track down some rare sheep and maybe catch glimpses of a snow leopard. But in tandem with that storyline, he is dealing with the death of his wife and going through this kind of Zen Buddhism philosophy about life and death and what it all means, while visiting these communities up in the Alps that are living vastly different lives. It's an interesting mashup of all of those things. Very slow, a lot of terms. I'm not a nonfiction reader, so I got lost in the terms of mountain ranges, of different animals, of different peoples, of like the cloth that a specific monk of a specific region uses. I couldn't keep them all in my head, so I kind of dumbed it down a bit. If he was talking about terms, I kind of just lopped it off and let's get on with the adventure, with the expedition. So a little heavy, but a lot of valuable stuff in there. A lot of relatable stuff in there, actually. Next up, Real Food for Pregnancy. I had no idea how to rank this with the other books. I put it right in the middle. A great read if you have a pregnant wife that you'd like to feed nutritiously. I thought it was well divided. It pretty much tells you in chapter form what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff. And then if you want to go into detail, you can see. Soy bad, liver good. Still looking for that tasty liver recipe. Sea of Rust by C. Robert Cargill. This is a post-apocalyptic world where robots rule. So already I'm in. I love that concept. It's pretty lighthearted, it's fast-paced, but there are these hints of philosophy in there, and there's a dash of existentialism, which makes for an interesting mix. There were a lot of action scenes in the book, and I don't do action scenes. Maybe I just haven't read the right action scene, but I'm always just waiting for the result. I'll go to the end of the paragraph and say, okay, who died? Who survived? It was a gunshot, explosion, whatever. Some of Your Blood by Theodore Sturgeon. This one's about a member of the army who writes a note home that gets caught by the censor, and they examine this guy. They bring him through a bunch of different psychological testings that you are also watching, and they try to figure out what the hell's going on with him, and so are you. Its aim as a book, as a piece of literature, is to humanize people, and I think that is the most noble aim that a book can have. At least it's what I need, because my mentalities tilt me one way, and I think a book like this, a book like In Cold Blood, tilts me the other way. There is empathy to be found everywhere, in every situation, and that is the balancing factor preventing you from misanthropy, I suppose, amongst other things. Another book like that, Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote, who did In Cold Blood. This is very different than the characters he's trying to humanize in Cold Blood, but it's a preppy, rich gold digger in New York City who you see as kind of heartless, as kind of predatory, and she is. And it's made well aware that's what she is, but like Capote did in Cold Blood, he shows you why that is, and he shows you that she deserves compassion just like everybody else, despite her flaws, which again, a very noble cause, I think. Next up, Blood Music by Greg Bear. Love this book. Great science fiction, really fast-paced, a lot going on. I think I said if you don't like it, wait 20 pages, it'll change. It goes from post-apocalyptic zombie book to body horror to psychological thriller. Reminded me a lot of The Mist by Stephen King, one of my favorite movies. A lot going on, a lot to love. No matter what you're into, I think you will like that book. Next up, Thorns by Robert Silverberg. I've really liked everything I've read of this guy's. This is about a futuristic Jerry Springer, I will say, who goes around trying to make matches, romantic matches of people, but not with the intent you might think. He finds a guy who was experimented on by aliens and a woman who was experimented on by humans, and he gets them together to see what will happen and to televise what will happen. This book, strangely enough, made me very introspective and kind of showed me a way that I was being an emotional vampire just in what I'm consuming, entertainment-wise, and how that's just not a very humane thing to do. So, appreciate that, Robbie. Next up, we got Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. Very popular one here on YouTube, and for good reason. Entertaining novel, very fast-paced, an interesting idea about this zone that was visited by aliens and is now radioactive as well as littered with traps that people don't know about, but also littered with invaluable alien technology that poachers go in, or stalkers as they're called in this book, go in and extract. So we follow one of these stalkers who is just a dude, the everyman, who makes his living in a very dangerous way. The best part about this book is when the beat drops, you know, when the big aha moment comes and the title is incorporated into the book and everything comes together and you're just like, damn. And you got to put the book down and realize all the implications of what that means. Makes you aware of the fact that you need to have a flexible worldview because things happen, things change, and if you can't change with them, then you have a problem. I feel like I said that earlier on. What book was that about? Next up, surprise, Dune by Frank Herbert. I just finished this one, haven't put it in a review video yet. Obviously, really enjoyed it. In addition to being this great sci-fi adventure novel with strong characters, there's a lot of philosophical depth to it, and it touches on a whole bunch of different ideas that I didn't think Dune was about. But more on that in the next review video, probably coming soon. Second best book I've read so far this year, Dune was the third. Second best, The Manticore by Robertson Davies. This is the second book in his Deptford trilogy, starting with Fifth Business, which I also loved. This follows one of the characters from that first book dealing with the unfortunate supposed suicide of his father. He goes to Sweden, Geneva, that's in Switzerland, not Sweden. He goes to Switzerland to see a therapist and try and unpack what is happening to him. It makes you aware that you need a holistic approach to that kind of mental health issue. And I thought it was really compelling despite being kind of heavy. It is a lot of Carl Jung's teachings, so I thought it was like a soft introduction to the philosophy of Carl Jung and how he thought everything had significance. And you can track down what is happening to you if you just give it enough thought. Also, the idea of the manticore is really interesting, this psychoanalytic concept of the mental manticore, which is a complex that you've created in your mind that has the head of something else and the body of something else, and it has a barbed tail. So it hurts to think about. So if you start thinking about it and it makes you anxious or depressed or gives you a panic attack, then you're going to stop thinking about it. So it remains undeveloped. That's the word I'm looking for, undeveloped. It's undeveloped part of your mentality that needs to be smoothed out, that can cause you issues otherwise. A lot of introspection in this book and a lot of real world advice that I took from it, almost like free therapy, which is pretty valuable. All right, my favorite book I've read so far this year is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. This is a post-apocalyptic world where pretty much everyone went blind. There was an astrological event, and if you looked at it, you went blind. But our main character was going through eye surgery at the time, and their head was wrapped up in a bandage. They awake into this world where people are struggling to find food, struggling to do everything because they're blind. And they form these different societies, some good, some bad. At the same time, there's this semi-sentient plant creature who feeds on humans, aka zombies, and I think this was a very early zombie book. I love zombie movies. I love that idea of this world where civilization has kind of collapsed and people are selling off their humanities in order to live, and some people are doing it more so than others, and kind of that ethical question on top of a storyline that's right for adventure, right for action. I love this book. Might break into the top 10. I've been meaning to do like a revisit to that top 10, see what's changed. Super fast-paced, action-packed, written in the 50s, I'm pretty sure, but it doesn't have those social obstacles that a lot of other old sci-fi books have. And there you have it, 20 books I read so far this year, ranked, hopefully read at least another 20 more. I will be back soon with my review of Dune and 2 other sci-fi masterpieces. As always, thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.